Merelyn Carter. Welcome to my Ordinary Angels podcast. This episode is called Finding Sarah, and it's my great pleasure to welcome to this episode Sarah McDonald.
Hi.
Hi, we're in front of a live audience tonight. We're filming this at the Cheeky Fox Retreat as part of the Discover, Activate, Soar weekend that we're all on. And tonight a whole multitude of other people have come to join us, and we thank you all for coming. I love that we have an audience, and I love that we're going to be able to share Sarah's story together. Now, Sarah, I'm just going to launch straight into it because you have an amazing story. And you and I have discussed your story a few times over the years, but I suspect tonight I'm going to find out more about it. And certainly a lot of people here haven't heard your story. But just to preempt it a little, you were a young girl who was raised in Thailand. You came to Australia when you were 6. And shortly after you arrived in Australia, your father, unbeknownst to your mother, abducted you and took you back to Thailand.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. Not only did he take you back to Thailand, but he took you back to a cult. And you spent the next 4 or 5 years tripping around the world with your father. And there was, unbeknownst to you, an enormous search on to find Sarah. And this is a lovely story. It has a wonderful ending now. But there's been a long journey between that little girl, Sarah, that was born and raised in Thailand, and the Sarah McDonald that you are today. How about you start us off and tell us a little bit about those early years in Thailand?
From as far as I can remember, I was born into the cult. So it was a commune, a lot of people, a lot of bungalows or houses. We did a lot of, we called it missionary work at the time. So
because it was a religious cult.
It is. It was. It is,
yes.
yeah. So I just remember being around a lot of people, but not necessarily with my parents. So a lot of other adults brought me up as well, and I mixed with other children too. So.
And then you remember coming to Australia with your mum and your dad?
Yeah, I remember going and getting passports done for us. I found out later it was because Mum didn't agree with the teachings, and she thought she had talked my dad into moving away from them to Australia to start a new life. Little did she know that he'd actually joined the cult on one of his travels through Australia. So he still knew people in Australia from the cult, and we moved to a little suburb called Greensboro. What Mum thought was a normal life, she didn't realise that Dad was still in contact with the cult, and told my mum that he was going to join me up to a local school, which in the cult you're not allowed to go to school. So she thought that was all legit and it was happening, and he went to take me to school one day and waved goodbye to Mum. They were up the back of the bus with my sister there, waving goodbye, and then as soon as they went around the corner, Dad grabbed my hand and just ran home with me. He'd already organised a taxi and tickets and everything back to Thailand.
Did you realise that you were being abducted?
No, I didn't know. Dad just said we're going back to Thailand, and honestly, I missed the cult. It was all I knew. I was lonely. I didn't like the Australian weather or food, and I missed.
That's because you came to Melbourne lifestyle. First, the weather.
It was terrible. It was so bad.
After Thailand, yeah.
But yeah, no, I was actually happy to go back, and I just assumed Mum and the others would be following. I didn't know what it meant. I just, we're taught just to obey and not question or argue. So yeah, you just do what you're told.
Can you outline the cult a bit more for us before we go any further? What were the expectation? What was the mission of the cult?
At the time, so I remember sitting in meetings like from 4 or 5 year old, and it was to spread God's love and pray with people, but the spreading of the love was to sleep with the men. The women were taught to do that, and we as children were taught that's what was done, to bring people into the group. And not just women, it was men as well, like everyone. That's how they showed God's love. If you didn't agree with it or you didn't want to do that, you weren't showing God's love for people. So it was a very, people obviously joined because they thought it was the right thing to do at the time. And it just sort of,
It was very fear-based? Did you go out and were people fearful that they weren't going to please God because there'd be terrible consequences?
Very manipulative. And as I grew up, it was a very us against them. So we were called the children of, the family, and outsiders were called system or the Systemites. So if you didn't do...
The Systemites.
Systemites,
right.
Yeah. So
like the Israelites so it was a very biblical kind of thing.
Yeah,
the Systemites. Yeah, interesting.
So it was very manipulative and very twisting of what they wanted to use it for. So.
But it made it sound kind of good, didn't it? Because it was like you had the right way, the narrow way, and they were the baddies.
Yeah.
Everyone else.
Yep.
And was it a conspiracy theory for them? Like, did they show you things to prove their point that the system was bad?
Yep, they hated the medical system. Like, they always thought, medicine and doctors and everything were wrong or against. They thought schools were manipulating children or teaching them the wrong thing. We just weren't allowed to mix with any outsiders for that. Yeah.
And who was running the cult?
Moses David Berg at the time, and we were taught to call him Grandpa. So he was like the granddad or the grandpa.
To keep familiarity?
As well, family.
Yeah.
Everyone was family.
Yeah. And within the cult, at an early age, before you went back, did you have any idea? Were you uncomfortable, or was this all just so normal to you? And
I liked it. It was what I knew. It was how I was brought up. So I was all right with it.
Yeah. So Dad came, took you. Mum's frantic back here in Australia, which you didn't know, of course, till many years later.
She called the federal police, but the Dad had organised a letter to be sent from Sydney to her, so she just assumed we were still in Australia.
Mm. So it was well thought out by your dad?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he had no intention of coming back with you?
No.
Or bringing the rest of the family back?
No. He told me they were following us, but never.
Yeah. So how do you think your mum felt when she married your father, knowing that he was involved in this cult? Did she know at the time when she married him?
No, she just thought he was a missionary until she got into...
Until she was married, and then the truth came out, and she felt trapped, obviously.
She did, but she never ever agreed with it. But being Asian culture, it's very submissive too, and he was a Western man, and she felt, the shame of, and just the expectation, especially because she married a Westerner. That was a big thing for her culture too.
Was that considered prestigious?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So she was submissive. She found herself in this situation she wasn't happy with. Had 2 children before she came to Australia?
She had 4.
4 before she came to Australia. Yeah. So this was a serious length of time that she was in the cult.
Yeah.
Have you ever talked to her about that and how that was for her? And because you're a mother yourself now, that must be really a hard thing.
She does ask, but I suppose because I'm a mum too and she's a mum, I try not to give her too many details, just because she feels a lot of, I suppose, her own guilt. for letting, like, well, she didn't let it happen, but she feels as a mum that was her duty to protect.
Yeah.
So I don't, like, talk too in depth, but she knows she was there, so she knows.
It would be heartbreaking for a mum.
Yeah.
And so Dad took you back. Mum's got in contact with the federal police, and the search started, but there wasn't a happy time for 3-4 years?
It was close to 5 years, 4.5, 5 years, yeah, until they contacted a lot of embassies. They hired private investigators, and then they contacted the Irish embassy in the end. So once I had to have, my dad's Irish, once I had to have my passport renewed, they thought maybe eventually we'll go back there.
So that was the only possible trace that your mum had in all those years?
Yes.
That your dad would have to go back into an embassy?
Yep, to Ireland to renew my passport.
Right, back into Ireland itself.
Yes. Yeah.
And you had your mum had some help here in Australia?
Yeah, she had Sister Frances, who actually was the one that instigated the letters, and she had a few, the senator at the time, a couple of the McGorrans involved, and they assisted and obviously with the funds and stuff. They helped out a lot. Yeah.
And there was a nationwide search, because at this point in time they thought you were still in
Sydney. Australia until they had freedom of information, when they found out the flight had actually taken out, but that was a year or two later, so then they started the search overseas. Right.
And we're going to overlay some of the press articles. So that was part of your mum's attempt to find you and to make people aware of this situation in case they saw you.
Yes.
Did you get on the side of a milk carton or anything like that as a missing child?
I don't think so.
Don't think so?
Not here. Well, I don't know here, but yeah.
Yeah, because they knew that you were with your dad, so I guess there was a level of security rather than not knowing at all who you were with.
It was more mum proving as well that I was in a cult, because he is my dad, so he had permission, or, as a parent. But it was just proving that what the cult was and who it was and how dangerous they were to get the help that they needed.
Yeah. How did she go about that? Because being a cult and the type of cult that it was quite secretive.
Yeah, so Sister Frances had actually collected a lot of information and paperwork and spoke to a lot of ex-members and collated it all, and sort of built a bit more of a case, which is really hard because they are very secretive, but she got there. She got a lot of letters and letters of support. So
yeah, tough for mum raising 3 more children in a country on her own, and no family here.
No.
So it was wonderful that these people stepped up and got involved to find you. Tell us a bit about you then. So it was obviously very hard for your mum and your siblings, and as a mum myself, I would have been completely and utterly beside myself, particularly if my husband had nicked off with my child and hadn't told me. Did she have PTSD from that?
I'd say she still does now. There's still a lot of stuff that she will talk and has. Yeah, there's stuff still now. Like, we're very close now, but it's taken a long time, many years. She sort of explained it in the way that she remembers me as who I was before I left. I was her daughter, and when I came back, I've never been the same. So her adjusting to that loss too, even now, she still says she remembers what I was like before.
And there's a big gap.
Yeah.
Not only in being apart, but your level of experience and the things that you went through while you're in Thailand wasn't a normal childhood by any manner of means. Yeah. So let's pick up you when you get to Thailand, and before you get taken into the Irish embassy and nabbed, because they literally had to take you aside, didn't they, and put you in another room, and because they would have had to prove who you were. And I guess they had to deal with your father as well. He wouldn't have been that happy.
They did. They knew who I was. The embassy were told not to alert my dad because North and South Island were separate or not working together at the time. So they were worried if Dad found out I'd go to North Island and that was it. They'd never see me again. But they did get the police there. One day we were walking home. And they had the helmets and the flat jackets and the guns, and they just came and just separated us. So that was, once we were found, that was it.
So that must have been very hard. So you're torn away from your mum and your siblings. Kind of got adjusted maybe a little bit to the life that you were living in Thailand, because children do adjust quite well. Yeah. But then when you were reunited with your mum and taken away from your father, that must have been harder because you were older and understood more.
That was the worst separation out of everything, was being separated from my dad. I didn't know that it wasn't right or it wasn't good to me. It was everything I knew and I loved. Yeah. And Mum was everything against that. So.
And she was really?
She wasn't my mum.
She was the enemy, really?
Yeah.
As far as the family was concerned. Are you happy to tell us a little bit more about what was involved for you, particularly as a child, in the cult, in those 5 years? So you came away as a young kid and you went back and you grew up, really, didn't you, in the cult? What were some of the activities that you had to do, and how did you view them at the time?
There was a lot of sitting on that side, watching a lot of teachings or doctrine, as they call it. There was a lot of, I would call it now pornography.
So very explicit imagery.
Very just teaching us that this was normal. I was 7 and 8 and doing sexualised things with boys or teenagers or whatever. I couldn't say no. I wasn't allowed to say, if I said no, I had, I had like demons in me or around me, stopping me from doing God's work. So
if you stepped out of line,
it was either
you were
beaten,
possessed by a demon,
or you were isolated or some sort of thing. So I learnt very quick how to adapt or show my, go along with it, sort of fly under the radar.
Be the good little girl.
Yeah. We weren't allowed to go to school, so eventually I think.
Not surprising, because you might have found out what the real world was like, right?
Yeah. 8 or 9, they started doing homeschool. We weren't allowed to even know our address. We'd sort of packed up and left homes in the middle of the night, just left as soon as they sort of caught wind that someone was onto us, or we'd have people come into the house to search and we'd have to sit in rooms and basically hide or just not say a word.
Was this framed as the enemy's coming and we need to look after each other?
Yeah, and it was just, we were taught just to do as we were told, and we all did it. We were so young, but it was just so, very obedient. You
and I have talked about in the past fishing. Tell us about that. We're not talking about fishing.
No, that was
PH fishing.
That was the flirty fishing for men, for God, to bring them into the cult, the group, and turn them into disciples or other, family members as well.
Save them. And so this was a sexual approach to these men?
Yes, yeah.
And so the men who took that up knew that there was children involved, because it was the children approaching them. Is that what happened?
It was younger women, so teenagers, up to sort of young adults that did it. But we as children already in there were to do it with them, like
when
once
they
or
and you're
allow
about
that.
Performing fairly explicit sexual acts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because we weren't allowed to ask anyone's ages, everyone was sort of the same age or the age group. So there were no adults, there were no children, and there was no... Whether or not I could have spoken up and said something, it didn't seem like we could at the time, because all the adults were allowing certain things. Dad saw things and allowed it. They filmed us doing dances and things for the group, so I always assumed everyone was... Yeah.
Well, you would, because there's these adults who are supposed to be protecting you, and they're telling you that this is okay, and that the world out there was wrong.
Yeah.
At what point in time where did things start to go, okay, I'm not sure that this is exactly how normal life, whatever that is. Was there any alarm bells before you were reunited with your mum, taken from the cult?
No, I just knew sometimes I didn't feel comfortable, and I hated myself for not feeling comfortable, because I felt I wasn't loving God enough, or I wasn't doing the right things, so I fought against that feeling. I did pick up very quickly when there were men that were sort of into that, but I made sure that I sort of avoided, or
So again, being the good girl and
keeping
everything above board from what you were expected of, but you had this little inner feeling sometimes.
Yeah, I did,
and
but
you had to hide that.
Told that was wrong. So
yeah. So for those of us here, of course, we're horrified by hearing this. And do you think it would be the same, or is it the same today with the internet and with the much broader understanding that we have of things that are happening around the world? We're talking how many years ago? Give away your age now.
So in the 80s.
In the 80s, yeah. So the internet
90s
wasn't around?
Non-existent. And I think that's probably what their downfall was. Eventually, when the internet and information came out, it was a little bit more harder to keep them.
Yeah, they were exposed a lot more easily.
Very much like if you Google it, there's so much old pamphlets and doctrines and stuff out there now. So,
so the warning got out.
Yeah.
So we'll come back to that later, because I want to know what's happened to the cult, and is it still going? And because I know that there was a bit of a journey for the cult itself. If you want to look at it in that way.
They're still there as missionaries in Asia mostly. They say that they've done a major overhaul to change everything, but I don't think I would go back just to see if that's true or not.
Yeah. That would be a whole lot of can open worms everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And emotions and...
So I just think, well, whatever they do is that I've sort of moved past.
Yeah, So you walk into the Irish embassy to renew your passport. Everything's hunky-dory. You get taken off into this separate room. What happened then?
Well, it was actually when we were going home, and they sent the police out to intervene, and the police came between me and Dad, and so I wasn't even allowed to... They let me say quick goodbye, touch, kiss on their cheek, and then that was it. I didn't see him again until the court case, and I wasn't allowed to be with him on my own. So I had a social worker there. He told me his name, can't remember it, but he said basically, you're coming with me, and they put me in a children's home that night, and while the court case was on in Thailand.
I'm sitting here thinking, fair enough. But that wasn't how you felt. You were torn. Your dad, was he angry? Was there an emotional response from him at the time? Do you remember?
No, he was... I think he knew, but I thought with my faith in God that I would go back to Dad. In my heart of hearts, I just was like, I'm going back to Dad. There's nothing anyone can do. That's where I'm meant to be, and that's God's will, and I'll go back to Dad.
Yeah. And so at what point in time did you meet your mum again?
That during that court case,
So this was a little bit. You were in the children's home for a little while, or was the court case pretty immediate because
it was pretty
arranged?
Yeah, she'd already once we walked in that embassy to tell her to renew the passport, Mum had been told straight away, so she was already on a flight over.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you saw your mum, tell us about that, because you know, a mother and your siblings being reunited with you would have been a joyous occasion. And we can kind of imagine, can't we, that we'd just grab you up and yeah, you're going to be fine. But it wasn't really like that, was it, for you?
No, I walked into a room and she was there, and the first thing I saw was she's got short hair. She's not one of us. So we weren't allowed to have
Part
short
of the
hair.
cult was long hair. And did your mum cut her hair to
She had a bob.
Stay away from that?
I don't know, but that was the first thing I noticed.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I like, and that when I saw that, I was like, don't trust her.
Wow.
So.
And then you had to go with her. She won the court case.
Yeah, that was. I don't think I've screamed or cried so much when she came and told me that she'd won the court case. So that was probably one of the most traumatic days of my life when she said that, because I just was so sure I was going back with Dad.
Yeah.
And then I never saw him again. So he just disappeared.
So this is an awful lot of grief for one little girl's heart. How did you work through this? Mum's going to be happy to have you back. Your siblings are going to be happy, but they haven't got their happy little Sarah anymore. You're hating them at some level, I imagine.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't stand to be around her. I loved my siblings, but, yeah, I couldn't stand to be around her.
And at 11, you wouldn't really be understanding, right, would you? As in, you wouldn't understand all. Did they explain to you why they'd taken you out of the cult? Did you start to go, oh, okay, what we were doing there wasn't healthy for me as a child?
No, just Systemites and bad, and don't tell them anything. And they made me see a psychiatrist at the Austin Hospital, and it was just like a shutdown. Don't tell them anything, they'll use it against you. They're evil, they're wrong, don't give them any information or anything against the family.
And how long did this last?
I think I was in high school. I was 15. And
so
then
3-4 years?
4 years, yeah. And then all of a sudden I was just sitting there, and then it just was like they were wrong. What they did was wrong. It was just
as in the family was wrong?
Yeah.
As in the cult was wrong?
The cult was wrong.
Suddenly?
It just hit me. And then I wasn't angry before that. Then I was angry.
And was there 15 years of anger?
Oh, there was a lot of anger.
What were some of the other emotions? Because did you feel shame, humiliation? Did you feel like you'd been used? What were some of the things that went through a 15-year-old head? Because you were a teenager then.
Yeah.
Puberty's happening, so much is going on. You should be in the fun part of your life, all those ups and downs.
Yeah.
But, you know, teenagers, it's a great time as you look back. Well, how was that for you? There must have been so much.
I felt very ashamed because my behaviour, my behaviour was very cult-like when it came to males, and I attracted even adult males. I looked for that because that's what I thought love was.
And it was your comfort zone, really, wasn't it? Yeah.
So I felt a lot of just this disgust in myself, and just too much.
Yeah, all came crashing down. Yeah. So suffice to say, there's enough men out there in the world who would take advantage of young girls when it's offered to them without a second thought.
Yep.
How do you feel about that? About those people?
Now or then?
Well, then it was part of your culture and you were looking for that. How do you see that now? As a mum and a grown woman, how do you view those people? Because were they doing it as part of their understanding? Were they blameless? Because as a child you were blameless, right? Because there was nothing that you could do. That was part of what you were being guided to do. It wasn't until you became that teen adult that you started questioning, which every 15-year-old starts questioning things. So how did you feel after that? Was this period of being uncertain whether that was okay, or was it just like came crashing down once, bang, and then you had to deal with the consequences?
No, I would say that when you're brought up in that way, the amount of brainwashing that goes on, I don't think you can ever fully get rid of how you think or how you're trained to think. So there is like a constant back and forth kind of, yeah, I do look at the way people do things in sort of like in normal circumstances, and I kind of wonder why I don't think that way or do that sort of same thing. I don't know whether it's because of my childhood or just I just think differently, but yeah, it's always like a constant. Still, yeah.
Yeah, right. Because when we understand now that those first 7 years of our life is when the rest of the 90% of our life is being programmed. And on this weekend, actually, we've been talking about the subconscious and the conscious mind. And most of us act less than 5% out of our conscious mind. And all our programming that's primarily done in those first 7 years is what our natural programming is. So the tape was taken out of the tape recorder when you were 15. And there was all this enormous shock saying, well, all my programming and everything I believe to be true is being questioned. And not only that, I guess for those 4 or 5 years when everyone was telling you it was wrong and you were fighting against them, suddenly you had all this whole new perspective to grasp. It's no wonder that it was a hard journey. And you acted out, didn't you, for the rest of your teenage years?
Well, yeah, no more than any other teenager, but I used it as an excuse to do, the drinking and the drugs and the different things that you do, because I had a lot of anger and hurt, and I felt like I had a right to act up, and I stole from Mum and I treated her badly, and I just did things because when you hurt, you just hurt other people. So when you're hurting, your actions kind of, not always.
Yeah, it's kind of like, was it kind of like that you wanted to make yourself feel better by being hurtful to others, or you felt so angry that being hurtful was your way of, I actually said acting out, not acting up.
I don't even think you realise it. I think you're just so broken or hurt. So
you're acting out of that 95% programming. So you consequently married down the track?
I did. I was. Yes.
Tell us the journey to that point, because that's a big different thing than being in the cult and that expectation. How did you get to that point?
Very, very rocky. But I did meet my husband at the time when I was 19, and I was still very unstable or very unsure at the time.
Yeah. And
he was very stable, very secure, had the parents I always wanted, that sort of life. So we got married and we had children. It has broken up over the last couple of years, but we're still, really good friends, and we parent together. So,
Now, was it difficult being in that one relationship with the expectations of what Western marriage is compared to your?
It was very, I did go to him after 6 months of being married and said, I'm having problems.
Yeah, right.
So it was... Yeah.
Because you had to really change your whole lifestyle, didn't you?
It was really difficult to understand and to kind of... I went to him telling him I'm feeling all these different things, and because he didn't understand where I was coming from too. So
it's a whole lot to take in, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did you feel for a lot of years were you heard in some places in your life? Did you have a platform for being able to debrief and work through all these changes? Or did you feel for a long time that you didn't have a voice in that? Did you feel like you didn't need a voice? Where were you inside with that?
I felt like, because at the time, my closest person to me, or my partner, wasn't, and through no fault of his own, but he wasn't able to help because it's such a deep-seated, like, it's in there. You can't always tell someone what, 19 years of your life has been. I still have a faith in God, and I just decided that I would work through stuff as I went along.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk a bit about your faith in God. Is it the same understanding of God as it was? Yeah.
No,
couldn't be, right?
Very different.
How did that transition happen?
When I realised that he wasn't to blame for what they did, because obviously you are very angry at the who you think is meant to look after you.
Yes, the adults. It's okay, we've got tissues, remember? we're allowed to use them. This is obviously a very deeply emotional thing, and I suspect if we looked in the audience there'd be some people borrowing the tissue box as well. And this is a great point to say thank you for being so open and honest about this, because I think this sheds a lot of light for us, very privileged people here in Australia. We protect our children vehemently by law. Now, the law we often feel falls short here, but compared to what we're hearing, we have a very good system compared to not much of a system in other parts of the world. So I guess at any point in anyone's life, when an epiphany happens like you obviously had at 15, your whole world is turned upside down. And you went on and you made changes. You've led what's kind of a normal life, but you've got this continuous turmoil still going on in you of questioning and rocking backwards and forwards a bit.
Isn't that life?
Yeah, it is.
It's always learning and growing, and I suppose I always felt, even at a young age, when the anger came, deep down knowing I didn't like that in me. I didn't like to be angry or hate people. I didn't want to be angry with Dad. I didn't want to be angry with the cult. I didn't want to be angry with the mum, because it changed who I was, and it made me into a person that was nasty or selfish, hard, and I didn't like that about myself. So, I wanted to better myself or use what I went through for good, not to follow in that cycle, which, can happen.
Yes.
With the drugs and the alcohol and,
yes,
all that trauma. So I wanted to
break free of that. Would it be fair to say that you chose not to be a victim ongoing?
Yeah, and I chose to forgive and to not hate anymore.
Let's talk about forgiveness, because, wow, that's a huge one in terms of, from where I'm sitting, what you had to forgive. But I guess in terms of life, everything's about perspective, isn't it? So for someone, forgiving what you needed to forgive seems absolutely huge. But for someone else, a much more minor misdemeanour might be something that is a stumbling block for forgiveness for someone else. So how did you get to this place of forgiveness, and how did you act that out?
A lot of years.
Yeah.
And it's slow, and it's very we say, very tiring at times.
Yeah.
But in the end, I've felt that freedom and that release. So I can speak to my dad now, and he often rings me. Not often, more when he's drunk or when he's feeling guilt and that shame, and he just wants to speak to me and ask me if I'm okay, or if I hate him, or if I'm basically okay. So I can hear the guilt in his voice and his shame, and that's his journey. I can't take that away from him, but all I can do is mine.
Yeah. And do you think that, are you able to, like, do you think that that's actually him trying to make himself feel better, or do you think it's genuine concern for you, a mixture of both? Because it must be really hard for him to be back in contact with you. He's probably desperate to be for a lot of years, but very difficult because from where we're all standing, he's definitely the guilty party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'd say his alcoholism is part of that, and no one is a bigger critic than yourself to who you are.
Of yourself.
Like,
Yeah.
And usually the hardest thing to do is not to forgive others, it's to forgive yourself, or to feel that you were forgiven.
So this word forgiveness for you covered all those. You had to forgive others. Where did you start? Did you start with forgiving yourself?
Myself.
Yeah, and how did you do that? Because all this came crashing in on you, and you had to question all of this in your teenage years, which are already topsy-turvy. And then, so how did you go about forgiving yourself? How did you know that's what you needed to do? And were you supported in that?
Well, to feel that you're forgiven, or, it's constant, because you're constantly making mistakes. You're constantly doing things. So that's a constant feeling. And again, that's my faith. That's my relationship with God, to feel that, I'm worthy and it's okay.
Yeah. And you're valued and valuable and loved and lovable. Is that a hard word for you, that you're lovable? Or you're at the place where that's cool?
Yeah.
Like most of us?
Yeah.
A bit like this?
At times, yeah.
Yeah. So you said you reunited with your father. How's your relationship with your mother and your siblings? How did that fold out over the ongoing years?
Oh, well, I've got one sister here. We're very close. And the other sister's in, interstate, but we're very close. And my mum has been a journey of many years of up and down, but we're at a good place. Again, she's still grieving that loss, but she's happier with where we're at now.
Terrific. Do you think that the journey that you've been through, do you think it's worse than most people?
No.
Give us some perspective on that for you. Because from where we're sitting, it'd be very easy for you to go, I've just had the worst life ever, and the worst thing happened to me, and but you are obviously not there.
No, because I would view having a sick or handicapped child as worse, or losing your partner or your child worse. I'm still alive. I still get to, and I'm healthy, and I get to walk around, and I get to choose what my life can be. Whereas there's so many people that are born into so much that they can't choose, whether it's in a different country, whether it's with a sickness or an illness. So definitely not worse or, yeah.
So you've just started a new job. And you've taken on an easy one. Tell us a little bit about that and why you've taken on this job. I'm saying easy.
Yeah, I suppose I can't even say what I do exactly, especially on camera, but I do work with young people, and really difficult young people now.
Who've had troubled lives, we can say that.
A lot of trauma and difficulties, and who are doing lots of things to other people too.
That aren't helpful, that are harmful.
Yeah.
So do you think that your experience and coming through all of that you went through, is that helping you be a more empathetic, compassionate person? And is that why you've chosen to work with young people? Because it's not just your current job, you've had a history of taking young people in who need help.
I think once I stopped feeling sorry for myself, and once I started wanting to be a better person, or using what I had, and I see my life as a gift, I see it as a almost like this incredible experience that not many people get to experience, and if I can use that, and it's not just talking about it, it's created the person I am today. So if I can use it for better, then it hasn't actually done damage. It hasn't, like, I wouldn't say thank you to them, but I'd say, like, it's...
You've worked through it. You're no longer the victim, and you're empowered knowing that you have choices and that you can forgive. Beautiful. So, Sarah, you've shared a lot with us in a short space of time here, and we thank you very much for doing that and for your openness and your honesty. This is not an easy thing for you to talk about, but your encouragement to us to love and forgive and to follow your faith and ask those big questions and find the answers, knowing that it's okay to go, I haven't quite got it all yet, always. I think that's a real inspiration to all of us to keep on that journey. Are you going to do something like write a book? This is a story that you're sharing here. Is that in, what are you thinking around that ongoing?
I was thinking about it, but I don't want to cause more hurt or anger or pain to the ones that would be in it, namely my mum and even my dad. So
yeah, I think we could all understand that. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful for you coming. And Sarah McDonald, you are an ordinary angel. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things.